Welcome to my presentation on how to design and execute symmetrical, finely crafted bowls from a fresh log. I started making bowls by turning on a lathe, and while I'm in awe of the craftsmanship demonstrated by a great many bowl turners, it didn't take long for me to become personally frustrated because often the most interesting features within a log could not be captured by the lathe's requirement for circularity. Drawn to the spatial flexibility of carving, I sought guidance from online videos, woodworking friends, and woodworking articles. My goal has always been to make bowls from the most interesting fresh logs that I can find and then employ symmetrical shapes to bring out those features. Lathe work taught me that if I'm going to use fresh wood, I must employ a two-step process. I carve wet, and then after the warpage that occurs during drying, I've got a carving in to reestablish symmetry. However, most of what I found were presentations for single-step carving. Symmetrical bowls were almost always carved using dry wood, or if they started with wet wood, they would harness that warpage to make organic shapes or rustic-looking objects. The few that used a two-step process to make symmetrical bowls from fresh wood employed only uniform wood with straight grain patterns so that the wood's inevitable warpage would be minimal and predictable. Unsatisfied, I began experimenting. From that experimentation, I discovered that using heterogeneous wet wood to make symmetrical shapes is really not all that difficult. This set of videos is intended to illustrate my process to make finely crafted bowls that are based on oval, rectangular, and even triangular shapes. In addition, with carving, you can make any size bowl that your tools permit. For example, if you've got a very large piece of really beautiful wood, make a big centerpiece for a large space. And you can make large bowls for family gatherings. But if the wood prefers it, and you've got the tools, a nut bowl makes really good use of a beautiful piece of wood. The target is a bowl with a visually symmetrical design, with thin rims, uniform sides, and handles and feet that are oriented properly with the bowl. Because we're anticipating warpage, we're free to use heterogeneous wood with complex patterns and internal anomalies to illustrate heterogeneity at the extreme. This piece of wetted wood, which is our trademark for pieces that are made out of grafted wood, is actually two different walnut trees grafted together about 100 years ago. Each tree is inherently presenting very different densities. We are intentionally incorporating sapwood with heartwood. And the grain pattern for the wood, illustrated by the annual rings, you can see is doing anything but going straight. I love complex wood for which warpage has to be anticipated rather than being minimal and predictable. What you'll see in this series of videos is the step-by-step process that will allow you to take an interesting log and create your carving blanks, design a preferred shape in the wet wood, and carve it for drying. Then, when dry and warped, that design will be reproduced and then recarved. When finished, it will be a finely crafted symmetrical bowl. Within these presentations, I intend to show the primary tools and props I use, which you will see are relatively inexpensive and many are quite informal. The series will focus on the design and nuances of each step required by having started with a wet log. So let's get started where the process begins, at the logs. My carving process starts with finding raw logs that I believe will contain interesting stories, and then identify formal shapes that can follow the wood's features but look intentional by their symmetry and form. Getting interesting wood at a reasonable cost requires that one seek out fresh logs before they crack and degrade. This is why wood turners using lathes generally get their wood raw and then twice turn it. Making bowls from wet wood requires we anticipate the deformation a bowl will incur during drying and have a post-drying process to bring it back into symmetry. Both power carving and hand-powered gouge carving are straightforward and are well covered by a host of videos, so the actual carving process will be given very little attention in this set of presentations. Instead, the goal here is to demonstrate how the design and carving process is different if you start with a wet, fresh log. You will see that you are no longer constrained by making only round bowls, and therefore your designs will be limited only by your piece of wood and your imagination. Regardless of how you carve, these steps will be the same. So let's get started and let's look at some bowls designed from the perspective of the wood. Carving offers the opportunity to reverse the design script. Woodworkers retain the option of seeking a piece of wood that will work for a predetermined design, but the flexibility arising from carving now makes it easier to follow the wood. This means determining the design suggested by the wood. This can be an entirely different experience. This bowl's design arose when looking at a beautifully featured but triangular piece of scrap walnut. This design was a fun way to take advantage of the odd piece of wood and highlight its features. Following the wood leads me to seek ways to take advantage of the strong contrast presented by some pieces of wood between the richly colored heartwood and the bright white sapwood. Long, narrow logs, seldom used in the past for making bowls, are actually ideal for fruit bowls and centerpieces. Finally, before moving to the production steps, let me say that I'm often asked, how long did it take to make a bowl? Obviously, size, wood defects, and design embellishments matter for whatever method a bowl maker uses to make their bowl. In Chapter 9 of this series, I will describe the results of my monitoring the range of time that I expended on each of the steps in making simple family-sized bowls like these. To make this point clear, these two carved bowls came out of separate 11-inch wide carving blocks. They took me an amount of time very similar to what I would have required to make this turn bowl, actually given to us by a friend, but turned from an 11-inch wide turning block. As you get experience, you too will discover that some non-round bowls can be made faster, while others may take you more time. Let me be clear about something else. My experience with lathe turning convinced me that lathe work is a wonderful, distinctive, and rewarding art form which will always be best suited for some pieces of wood, project styles, or goals. Therefore, I'm presenting bowl carving as a complement, not as a replacement for anybody's bowl making practice. But more importantly, if you try this, I hope you find yourself smiling when somebody asks you how long it took to make a particularly distinctive bowl. You may find yourself saying, the basic design and carving steps were quick. However, I was able to spend a lot of fun time initially matching this interesting piece of wood to a shape that took advantage of the features, and more fun time was spent saving some really distinctive features that required special care. With that, let's get started where the process begins and make a bowl blank.